The message arrived on Earth without warning, without emotion, and without apology. It cut through every human network at the same moment, translated instantly into every language, displayed on every screen. Governments froze. Cities went silent. People stared at the words and felt something old and cold settle into their bones. The Velari Dominion had spoken. They were not new to humanity. Their ships had hovered at the edges of known space for decades, watching, studying, never interfering. Tall, pale, almost fragile in appearance, the Velari ruled a massive region of the galaxy. Their technology was elegant and ancient, their society rigid and ceremonial. They were polite, distant, and always in control. Until now. The message was short. Their species was dying. Their birth rates were collapsing. Their genetic lines were failing. Their scientists had searched every world they knew, every species they had catalogued. Only one solution remained: humanity. The order was clear. One human male would be brought to the Velari capital world. He would enter a binding alliance with the daughters of the High Matriarch. From this union, new life would be created. The survival of the Velari depended on it. The final line was the most chilling. Compliance was expected. Commander Elias Wren was not watching the message when it arrived. He was in a quiet room deep beneath a research facility, staring at a wall covered in symbols and sounds that only a few people on Earth could understand. Alien language patterns, alien thought structures, alien silence. He heard the alarms before he saw the screens. Moments later, the door opened and Director Han stepped inside. Her face was tight, her voice controlled in the way it only became when history was about to change. "They've asked for you," she said. Elias turned slowly. Asked. She did not answer right away. Instead, she activated the wall display. The Velari message appeared again, unchanged, merciless in its calm certainty. "They didn't know my name," Elias said after a moment. "So how did they choose me?" Han folded her arms. "They didn't choose you as a person, they chose you as a pattern." She explained what the Velari had discovered. Human DNA contained chaotic adaptability. It broke rules. It survived damage. It changed fast, sometimes recklessly, sometimes beautifully. Among billions of humans, Elias carried markers that appeared again and again across the species. He was not special. That apparently made him perfect. "You're saying they don't care who I am," Elias said. "They care that you're human," Han replied. "And that you can survive things they can't." Elias leaned back in his chair. His first feeling was not fear, it was irritation. "They ordered us," he said, "like we're parts." "They ordered survival," Han said softly, "for them. And what about us?" That question had no easy answer. Within hours, Earth's leaders argued, shouted, calculated. Some saw opportunity, some saw danger, some saw shame. The Velari had fleets that could erase worlds. Refusing them could mean war. Accepting could mean something worse. Through it all, Elias sat in silence. He had spent his life studying aliens. He understood their logic. Their culture valued continuity above all else. To them, an individual was a vessel for the species. Choice was secondary to survival. Humans were different. When the final decision came, it was presented carefully, wrapped in words like diplomacy and necessity. Elias would go, not as property, not as a prisoner, as an envoy. At least that was what Earth told itself. The Velari ship that arrived to collect him was massive and smooth, like a single piece of sculpted stone floating in space. Elias boarded without resistance, carrying nothing but a small case and a larger weight he could not name. As the ship left Earth behind, he watched the blue planet shrink into the dark. He wondered if the Velari understood what they were asking. The journey took weeks. During that time, Velari attendants observed him constantly. They asked questions about human history, reproduction, social bonds. Their tone was polite, curious, and completely detached. Elias answered honestly but carefully. He spoke of choice, of relationships formed by will, not command. of mistakes, rebellions, failures that led to growth. The attendants listened, but he could tell they did not truly understand. To them, these ideas were inefficient. When they arrived at the Velari capital world, Elias finally saw the empire up close. Tall crystal structures rose from pale plains. The sky shimmered with unfamiliar colors. Everything was clean, symmetrical, and still. Too still. He was brought before the high matriarch in a vast chamber filled with light. She was older than he expected, her movements slow but deliberate. Her eyes studied him like a scientist examining a final variable. "You are the human," she said. "I am Elias Wren," he replied, "a representative of my people." "You are sufficient," the matriarch said. "Your cooperation will ensure the continuation of my line." Elias felt a tightness in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "And my consent?" he asked. The chamber went quiet. The matriarch tilted her head slightly. "Your species survives because it adapts." "This is adaptation." "No," Elias said, "this is command." The Velari around them shifted, uneasy. The concept was clearly unexpected. "You misunderstand," the matriarch said. "This is an honor." Elias met her gaze. "Honor given without choice is not honor, it's control." For the first time, something like uncertainty crossed her face. "You were not brought here to debate," she said. "Then you brought the wrong human," Elias replied. The words echoed through the chamber, sharp and dangerous. Elias knew he was standing at the edge of something vast. He could comply and become what they wanted him to be, a solution, a tool. Or he could refuse and risk everything. What the Velari did not yet understand was this: humans did not survive because they obeyed. They survived because, when pushed too far, they pushed back. And this was only the beginning. Elias did not leave the chamber after his refusal. The Velari did not arrest him, threaten him, or raise weapons. Instead, they did something that confused him far more. They waited. The high matriarch studied him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Around them, the council members stood in silence, their tall forms perfectly still. This was not how the Velari handled conflict. Elias could sense it. They were a people of order, of planned outcomes. His words had disrupted something they did not know how to correct. "You will be given time," the matriarch finally said. "Reflection improves compliance." "I'm not here to be corrected," Elias replied. "I'm here to talk." The matriarch turned away, signaling the end of the audience. Elias was escorted from the chamber, not to a cell, but to a large living space overlooking the pale plains of the capital world. It was comfortable, carefully designed, and clearly meant to impress. It felt like a cage made of kindness. Hours passed, then days. Velari scholars visited him, asking questions that circled around the same point. Why did humans resist what ensured survival? Why did individuals matter more than species? Why did humans attach emotion to function? Elias answered patiently. He told them stories. He spoke of early human history, when survival meant bands of people trusting one another by choice, not by force. He spoke of mistakes, of wars, of systems that failed because they ignored the individual. He explained that humans had nearly destroyed themselves many times, and each time it was disagreement and defiance that forced change. "The human mind is not stable," one scholar observed. Elias smiled faintly. "Neither is life." The Velari recorded everything, but their questions grew sharper, more focused. It was clear they were not used to being challenged from inside a discussion. Their culture valued consensus, but consensus had long ago hardened into law. On the fourth day, Elias was told he would meet the daughters. They arrived together, escorted but unrestrained. They were younger than the matriarch, their movements quicker, their expressions more varied. Elias could feel it immediately. These three were not the same. The eldest studied him with calculating eyes. She spoke first, her voice calm and precise. "You are not afraid," she said. "I am," Elias replied. "I just don't let fear decide for me." The second daughter watched him closely, her head tilted slightly. You speak often of choice. But choice brings chaos, chaos brings extinction. Sometimes, Elias said, sometimes it brings growth. The third said nothing at first. She stood with her arms crossed, her posture tense. There was something sharp in her gaze, something restless. You refuse the order, she finally said. Do you believe yourself superior? Elias shook his head. No, I believe myself responsible. That answer surprised them. Over the next several meetings, the daughters questioned him separately. Each encounter felt like a test, though Elias could not always tell what was being measured. The eldest wanted logic. She asked about probability, about long-term outcomes, about whether human adaptability could truly help the Velari. Elias explained that no outcome was guaranteed. Humans survived not by predicting the future perfectly, but by adjusting when predictions failed. The scholar daughter wanted meaning. She asked why humans formed bonds beyond survival. Elias spoke of trust, of shared struggle, of how cooperation chosen freely created stronger systems than obedience forced. The warrior daughter challenged him openly. She questioned his refusal, calling it weakness disguised as pride. Elias did not argue. Instead, he asked her a question in return. When your empire began to fail, he said, did anyone challenge the system? She was silent. That silence told him more than words. Slowly, something shifted. The daughters began to argue among themselves, not in public, but in quiet moments Elias overheard or sensed. Their unity was cracking, not because of him, but because he had named something they already felt. The Velari were not dying because they lacked the right genetics. They were dying because they had stopped changing. Elias brought this idea to the daughters carefully. He explained that human history was filled with examples of rigid systems collapsing under their own perfection. That survival required risk, disagreement, and sometimes failure. You are trying to save your people by repeating the same patterns, he said. That has never worked for anyone. The scholar daughter listened deeply. The eldest considered silently. The warrior looked angry, but her anger was no longer aimed at him. The turning point came when Elias asked to address the court again. This time, the request was not denied. In the great chamber, Elias stood alone before the matriarch and the council. The daughters stood behind him, not beside the throne. I was brought here as a solution, Elias said, but I am not your cure, I am your mirror. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. You believe survival can be ordered, he continued. That life can be commanded into existence. Humans tried that once. It failed every time. The matriarch's gaze hardened. You offer no alternative. I do, Elias said, but it requires something you fear. Explain, she demanded. Change, he said simply. He proposed a shared genetic archive, voluntary participation, and cultural exchange. Not one human, many, not command but cooperation. He spoke of humans who would choose to help, scientists who would work alongside Velari minds, artists and thinkers who would bring unpredictability into a stagnant system. This is inefficient, a council member objected. So is extinction, Elias replied. The matriarch looked to her daughters. For the first time, they did not look back at her with obedience. The scholar daughter stepped forward. We are dying, she said, not because we lack strength, but because we refuse uncertainty. The eldest followed. We have preserved our empire perfectly, she said, and preserved it into decay. Finally, the warrior spoke. If survival requires surrendering control, she said, then perhaps control is the enemy. The chamber fell into stunned silence. The matriarch looked old then. Truly old, not just in years, but in weight. You would abandon tradition, she said. No, Elias said gently, you would evolve it. The decision was not made that day, but something irreversible had begun. The Velari no longer saw Elias as a resource. They saw him as a question they could not ignore. And questions, Elias knew, were far more dangerous than defiance. The days after the second court gathering felt heavier than any that came before. Nothing was decided, yet everything had changed. Elias could feel it in the way the Velari moved around him. The quiet certainty was gone. Scholars hesitated before speaking. Guards no longer stood as stiffly. Even the air of the capital seemed less still, as if the planet itself had begun to breathe again. The High Matriarch withdrew from public view. That alone sent shockwaves through the Dominion. For generations, her presence had been constant, unchallenged, absolute. Her silence now was not weakness, but it was unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things unsettled the Velari deeply. The daughters continued to meet with Elias, though their conversations grew less formal. They no longer asked only questions. They shared thoughts. The scholar spoke of old data locked away because it contradicted accepted models. The eldest admitted that council decisions had become rituals rather than solutions. The warrior confessed that Velari youth were growing restless, confused by a future that felt already decided. Elias listened more than he spoke. He understood something important now. The Velari were not cruel. They were afraid of loss, afraid of uncertainty, afraid that letting go of control would mean the end of everything they had protected for so long. Humans knew that fear well. One cycle later, the matriarch summoned the full council, the daughters and Elias. The chamber was filled beyond capacity. News of possible reform had spread across the Dominion, and representatives from distant systems had demanded to witness the moment. Some came in hope. Others came in anger. Elias stood again at the center, but this time he did not feel alone. The matriarch entered slowly. She looked smaller than before, her posture less rigid. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. "Our people face extinction," she said. "This truth has not changed." A pause followed. "But the cause of our decline has been misunderstood." Murmurs spread through the chamber. "For generations, we believed survival came from preservation," she continued, "from holding tightly to what worked once. We believed change was threat." Her gaze shifted to Elias. "The human has shown us that change is also survival." Silence fell, deep and tense. She raised a hand. "The order stands before us, to compel, to command, to take what we need by authority." The warrior daughter stepped forward. "And if we do," she said, "we prove that we have already failed." Gasps echoed. Never before had a daughter spoken so directly against a ruling decree. The eldest followed. "We would survive in body," she said, "but not in spirit. And that survival would be temporary." The scholar added quietly, "A system that cannot accept uncertainty will collapse under it." The matriarch closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, her decision was clear. "The order is withdrawn," she said. The chamber erupted. Some cried out in relief, others shouted in outrage. Several council members protested loudly, warning of collapse, of risk, of dishonor. The matriarch raised her voice, and the noise died instantly. "We will not compel humanity," she declared. "We will not reduce survival to command." She turned to Elias. "Human envoy," she said, "you are free to leave." Elias felt a tightness in his chest ease for the first time since he arrived. "But," she continued, "if your people are willing, we ask for alliance. Voluntary. Shared, uncertain." Elias bowed his head slightly. "That is a request humans understand." The days that followed were chaotic. News spread to Earth. Human leaders reacted with disbelief, then cautious relief. There were debates, protests, celebrations. Some argued that humanity owed nothing. Others believed cooperation could change the galaxy. In the end, it was not governments that decided. It was people. Scientists volunteered. Cultural envoys stepped forward. Artists, engineers, linguists, and explorers offered their time. Not because they were ordered, but because they chose to. Elias stayed longer than planned, helping build the first framework of the alliance. Velari and humans worked side by side, often clashing, often misunderstanding, but always learning. The Velari struggled with disagreement. Humans struggled with Velari patience. Progress was slow, messy, and alive. Birth rates did not immediately rise. Systems did not instantly improve, but something else changed. Hope appeared. Not the quiet, controlled hope of preservation, but the wild, dangerous hope of possibility. One evening, as the pale sky shifted colors above the capital, Elias stood with the daughters on a high terrace. "You changed everything," the scholar said. Elias shook his head. "You did, I just refused to disappear." The warrior looked out over the city. "Your people are strange," she said. "You survive chaos." "We don't survive it," Elias replied. "We learn from it." When the time came for him to leave, the matriarch met him privately. "You could have saved us by obedience," she said. "And doomed you later," Elias replied. She inclined her head. "Perhaps." As Elias boarded the human vessel waiting in orbit, he looked back at the Velari world. It was still fragile, still uncertain, but no longer frozen. When he returned to Earth, he was not celebrated as a hero. There were no grand parades, only quiet recognition of something important. Humanity had been ordered to submit, and instead it had taught an empire how to change. That was the human way, not domination, not obedience, but choice. And somewhere in the vast dark between stars, that lesson began to spread. Time did not move gently after Elias returned to Earth. It surged. News of the Velari alliance spread across human space faster than anyone expected. Some people celebrated it as proof that humanity could stand equal among the stars without surrendering its values. Others feared it, warning that the Velari were still an empire, still powerful, still alien. Elias tried to stay out of the noise. He returned to a quieter life, teaching, advising, answering questions when asked. He believed his part was finished. The Velari had chosen change. Humanity had chosen cooperation. The rest would take care of itself. He was wrong. The first warning came not from the Velari, but from a human colony on the edge of explored space. A long-range sensor station went silent. Then a trade convoy vanished. No debris, no distress signal, just absence. At first it was blamed on navigation failure or deep space hazards, but Elias felt the old tension return, the one he had felt when the Velari order first arrived. This silence felt deliberate. Soon after, the Velari sent a message, not an order, a request. Their outer systems were under pressure. An unknown force was probing borders, testing defenses, striking weak points and disappearing. The Velari fleets were strong but rigid. Their formations were designed for known enemies, known wars. This enemy did not follow rules. The matriarch asked for Elias, not as a negotiator this time, as a bridge. Elias stood again on the Velari capital world weeks later, but the atmosphere was different. There was motion now, urgency, fear that was no longer hidden behind ritual. The daughters met him immediately. "This enemy," the scholar said, "does not seek conquest, it seeks collapse. They disrupt systems," the eldest added, "communication, logistics, morale." The warrior clenched her hands. "They fight like predators, not soldiers." Elias listened carefully. The description felt familiar in an unsettling way. "Have they spoken?" he asked. "No," the scholar replied. "They do not announce themselves." Elias exhaled slowly. "Then they are watching reactions." The Velari had never fought an enemy like this. Their strength was overwhelming force, perfect coordination, absolute command. Against chaos, that strength became a weakness. Elias proposed something radical: joint human Velari task groups, mixed command, flexible authority. The idea shocked the council, but this time the resistance was weaker. Fear changes people faster than philosophy. The first joint fleet launched within days. Human ships flew beside Velari vessels, their designs clashing in style and doctrine. Velari formations were tight and precise. Human ships drifted, adjusted, argued over channels. It was uncomfortable. It worked. When the enemy struck again, the human ships broke formation, lured the attackers into unpredictable patterns, then fed data back to the Velari gunners. For the first time, the enemy retreated under fire. The victory was small, but the impact was massive. The Velari began to see what Elias had tried to teach them from the start. Survival was not about perfect control. It was about response. As battles continued, more truths emerged. The enemy was not a single species. It was a coalition of remnants, civilizations that had collapsed under rigid systems much like the Velari's old one. They had learned to survive by tearing others apart before stagnation could claim them. They feared empires. They feared stability. They believed destruction was mercy. When Elias heard this, he felt a chill. "They're us," he said quietly, "or what we could become." The matriarch listened in silence. "They believe the galaxy must burn to stay alive," Elias continued. "You believed it must never change. Both are extremes." "What is the human answer?" she asked. Elias did not respond immediately. He thought of Earth, of wars and recoveries, of systems breaking and being rebuilt by people who refused to accept only two choices. "The human answer," he said at last, "is neither control nor collapse. It's rebuilding, again and again." The idea was dangerous. It meant offering dialogue to an enemy that thrived on chaos. It meant risking betrayal. It meant trusting choice over certainty. The matriarch agreed. A message was sent into the dark, not a threat, not a command, an invitation. It took time. In that time, battles continued. Losses mounted. Humans and Velari learned to fight together, to argue together, to fail together. Bonds formed not through design but through shared survival. Elias became something unexpected, a symbol, not of authority but of refusal, refusal to accept false choices, refusal to surrender to fear. When the enemy finally responded, it was not with ships, it was with words. They spoke of broken worlds, of civilizations that chose order until they suffocated, or chaos until nothing remained. They accused the Velari of being the same. They warned humans that alliance would end the same way. Elias answered them. He spoke of Earth's failures, of how close humanity had come to destroying itself many times. He did not deny it. He did not excuse it. He explained that humans survived not because they were better, but because they kept choosing again. New systems, new ideas, new chances. "You don't have to burn the galaxy," he said, "and you don't have to freeze it." The response was not immediate acceptance, but it was hesitation. That hesitation changed everything. The attack slowed, then stopped. Talks began, fragile, hostile, necessary. The Velari watched in disbelief as Elias and human envoys sat across from beings who had defined themselves by destruction, and spoke not of surrender, but of rebuilding together. It did not solve everything. Some enemies refused. Some conflicts remained. Some scars never healed. But a pattern emerged. The galaxy had believed there were only two paths: absolute control or endless chaos. Humanity introduced a third: change chosen freely again and again. Years later, Elias stood on Earth, watching a new generation train for deep space. Humans, Velari. Others who had once been enemies. The galaxy was still dangerous, still uncertain, but it was alive. Elias knew then that the Velari order had never really been about survival through blood or command. It had been about fear of the unknown. And humanity, as it always had stepped into the unknown and said, "We'll figure it out, together." The galaxy did not become peaceful after that. It became honest. That honesty was harder to live with than war. Years passed, measured not only in time but in change. The alliance between humans and the Velari grew slowly, unevenly. Some systems flourished under shared effort. Others resisted, clinging to old ways or rejecting cooperation out of fear. No single rule could guide them all, and that was exactly the problem the Velari once would have tried to eliminate. Now, they were learning to live with it. Elias aged, though not as quickly as he expected. Medical advances from shared research extended human life, but he still felt time in his bones. He no longer stood at the center of events. Others had taken his place. Younger voices, sharper minds, louder disagreements. That was good. He spent most of his days teaching, writing, and listening. He was often asked to speak at councils or academies, but he rarely accepted. When he did, he spoke less about victory and more about failure. Failure is information, he would say. Ignore it and it repeats louder. The Velari daughters had changed as well. The eldest now led a rotating council rather than a fixed throne. Decisions were slower, messier, and often frustrating, but they no longer froze when the future looked unclear. The scholar daughter became a bridge between cultures, pushing for open archives and shared education. Old Velari secrets were no longer hidden from fear of contradiction. The warrior took a role no one expected. She trained joint defense units, not just in combat but in decision-making under uncertainty. She taught Velari soldiers how to think instead of wait. Still, not everyone accepted the new way. There were factions within the Velari who believed the empire had weakened itself. Among humans, there were voices that said humanity was giving too much, risking too much, trusting aliens who might never fully understand them. Tension built quietly. The breaking point came far from the capital worlds, in a system no one thought mattered. A joint human-Velari settlement failed. Resources were mismanaged. Leadership argued. Communication broke down. When supplies ran low, fear took over. Old instincts returned. Orders were given. People were forced. Resistance followed. Violence erupted. By the time help arrived, the settlement was gone. The news hit hard. Those who opposed cooperation seized the moment. They pointed to the ruins as proof that shared systems did not work. That difference bred conflict. That control was safer than choice. The Velari Council split. Human governments argued. The fragile balance threatened to collapse into familiar patterns. Elias watched it unfold from a distance, feeling a heavy sadness. He had seen this before, not on a galactic scale but on Earth, countless times. People were not afraid of failure. They were afraid that failure meant the idea itself was wrong. The matriarch was long gone, her era ending quietly. One of the daughters reached out to Elias, asking him to attend one final gathering. He hesitated. He was tired, but some moments still mattered. The chamber was smaller than before. No grand displays, no ceremonial silence, just representatives from many species sitting together in uneasy closeness. Elias stood slowly, leaning on the edge of the table. "You think this proves cooperation is a mistake," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It doesn't," murmurs followed. "You think failure means we should return to control or retreat into ourselves," he continued. "That is the oldest lie intelligent life tells itself." A Velari elder spoke sharply. "Lives were lost." "Yes," Elias said, "and lives were lost when you never changed at all, and when humans ruled themselves without restraint. Loss does not tell us which path is right. It tells us where we must look harder." He looked around the room. "That settlement didn't fail because humans and Velari worked together," he said. "It failed because they stopped listening, because fear replaced trust, because someone decided order mattered more than people." The room fell quiet. "We don't honor the dead by pretending we can avoid all risk," Elias said. "We honor them by learning." He sat down, exhausted. The decision that followed was not dramatic. No grand declaration. No return to old empires. They chose to rebuild, not the settlement but the idea. They documented every mistake, every argument, every point where fear took control. The records were shared openly without shame. New systems were designed not to prevent failure but to respond to it faster. It was uncomfortable. It worked. Years later, the galaxy looked different, not unified, not peaceful, but connected. There were still conflicts, still borders, still disagreements that sometimes turned violent, but there was also memory. shared memory of what happened when fear ruled completely. Elias lived to see a generation that did not know the old Velari Empire, or a humanity alone in the dark. They grew up arguing with aliens in classrooms, serving together on ships, rebuilding worlds that never should have existed in the first place. On his last visit to the Velari world, Elias stood again on a high terrace, watching the sky shift through its strange colors. The warrior stood beside him, older now, calmer. "You were wrong once," she said. Elias smiled faintly. "Only once." "You said humans survive chaos," she continued. "I think you survive responsibility." Elias considered that. "Maybe," he said, "but only when we accept it." When Elias died, there were no monuments across the galaxy, no statues towering over cities, just stories. Stories told in many languages on many worlds about a human who refused to be a solution and instead became a question that never went away. What do we choose when fear offers us control? The galaxy was still answering that question. And as long as it kept answering, it kept living.